Okay, folks, welcome again to another Mid-Ulster Amateur Radio Club Tuesday night lecture. And we're really glad here to have with us Laurie G3UML. And hopefully you can all see him there okay. For those who this is their first time, I am Dave, call sign 2I0SJV, Sierra Juliet Victor, and I help organise this Tuesday night lecture series that has kicked off during lockdown for amateurs, not just here in Northern Ireland, not just down south, but all over the UK and further afield. So everyone, if this is your first time, you're more than welcome to the Mid-Ulster Amateur Radio Club. One point just to, you'll probably know it's coming. I like to plug it. We have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search for MUARC, the initials of our club name, you'll get all our previous lectures that have been happening since lockdown began, with some great topics there. You'll also find this one here in a few days as well, once we've got that up and running. So, Laurie, how are we doing?
Well, hi everybody. I'm not sure how many we have here. I can see a grid of 25 on my screen. There may be more, but I can see a K3 call and a GW call and a G call as well. So we look quite international. Thank you very much for inviting me, Dave. It's lovely to do this. I do Zoom calls all the time for work, but I have to say it's the first time I've done one like this. So if I end up looking like a scared rabbit or at the wrong camera or something, cut me some slack. But anyway, we'll battle on as best we can.
Absolutely, there's no pressure here, and we're not as serious as sometimes it comes across. We like to have a wee bit of, as we would call it over here, a bit of crack, a bit of a laugh. But you'll know all about that term, and we'll get to that later anyway. During this evening. So, Laurie, do you want to start off with just in case anyone doesn't know who you are, your call sign, and what is it you do?
Okay, well, I'm, as you can see, a relatively old call, G3UML. I just passed my 55 years on the air this week, so got my call sign in August 65. Was actually involved a long time before that because my father was G3NMR. He died many years ago, but he came on the air in 59. And so I kind of got interested when he got interested when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and what this has meant is that I kind of started off with a very good station and very good equipment, so perhaps not the normal experience. So I've been on the air since 1965, short break in the late 70s, early 80s when I got married and left the what was the family home, and eventually we ended up somewhere here in London where I could consider putting some antennas up and getting back on the air again. As I say, I'm 70 years old now, been on the air since I was 15 years old. I have worked at the BBC as a journalist since 1974 again. Been probably the longest serving person in BBC News now, I think. Don't think there's any older than me knocking around. I am a news editor for network television, network radio and the BBC News Channel, which means on any one day I'm either responsible for news coverage, either for main BBC One bulletins, the main radio bulletins, principally Radio 4, or the continuous news channel, which I assume most of you are familiar with. And I'm also a field producer as well. So that means on major stories, I sometimes actually get sent out in the field. And the most extraordinary example of that actually is relevant to you because I was in Derry last March doing forgetting precisely what the story was, but it was a Bloody Sunday related story in Derry. And we had a couple of very busy days. We finished up and it was on a Friday about whenever it was. And I woke up that morning and turned on the TV in my hotel in Derry and saw what was going on in New Zealand with the shooting.
That's right,
wow,
yeah.
Terrible story. I wonder how they're going to go about covering that. Anyway, had a fairly relaxed morning, had breakfast with all my colleagues. I was due to fly back to London that afternoon and went with one of my colleagues. We said, let's be tourists. So we walked over the bridge to the waterside then came back again and were walking around the walls, and were halfway around the walls when the phone goes and the office says, "Hi, Laurie, can you go to New Zealand?" I said, "Well, I'm not only in Northern Ireland," I said, "I'm at the other end of Northern Ireland." But anyway, we worked it out, and I got a flight back to London and didn't a suitcase full of dirty washing, having been in Northern Ireland for a week. Got on an Emirates flight at Heathrow, and 40 hours later tipped out at Christchurch, and
Wow.
ended up working for about 7 days non-stop on that extraordinary, tragic story in New Zealand. So
Absolutely.
that is the sort of thing I do. I've probably worked in about 30 or 40 countries over the years, done several wars, and have spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland. We can go into that in more detail later, but it's a place I'm immensely fond of. I love the people. I love the sense of humour. I love the countryside. And from the point of view of being a news journalist, of course, it's been a great story. From your point of view, and this is probably good, it's not quite as great a story as it was the first time I came in 1976, but that's probably no bad thing as far as most of the people who live there are concerned. So that's sort of who I am. So I've been a radio ham since I was 15, been a BBC journalist since I was 24. I am married. I have 2 grown-up daughters, one who lives 3 miles away, the other one who is in Sydney, Australia. We have 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl in Sydney. We have 3 grandchildren, 2 of whom have only just left, 5, 3 and 6 months, who are here in London. I am working full-time, working from home. I've not actually been into the office since March because of the coronavirus thing. But working from home works reasonably well, actually. It's our job is basically dealing with information and pictures and knowledge and that sort of thing. And of course, it's the kind of thing you don't actually need to be in the office to do. You can do almost anywhere. So that's the kind of outline of me.
And, it just made me think there. I get on the HF and think, oh, I'd love to work this country, but literally, and we'll go on to that as well, obviously, one of your stories, but you have nearly worked in a lot of the countries that you've actually managed to get round to the far side of the world and everything else. So the question there is, you've visited all these countries, you're still flat out busy, Laurie. Do you actually get time to play the radio anymore?
Well, I do. I'm not going mad here. I'm just going to turn around. I don't know how well this is going to show up. This is the station, which is the Yaesu FTDX 101D.
Lovely.
Which I've had for about a month and which I'm very fond with. The amplifier is the Expert 1.5K, which again I've only had for about 6 months. I upgraded all of the station this year. Pointing, again, I don't know how this is going to show up, but you can probably see a lot of trees out there and a lot of wire. I've actually got quite a small garden, but there is a park at the back of the house, and there's a whole bunch of wire antennas there that we can talk about later. Now, as I say, my kind of, well, am I still there, Dave?
Yeah, still here, yeah, all good.
Pushing that around. What have I done here? Lost the picture, hold on. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so when I say my ham radio story is a bit back to front, I started with a very good station. My father had been on the air for 5 or 6 years. He was very keen. Got my license in 65. We had the Heath SB line, which some of your older members may remember. It was made by Heath Kit. You built them yourself, but it was very good equipment. We had a 60-foot tower in the garden. We had a TH6 antenna on the top of it. So basically, I worked 100 countries in 9 days. I worked 200 countries in 3 months and 300 countries in 2 or 3 years. So and this was when I was 16 and 17. I fully admit this is not the normal experience. My parents died in the 70s. I eventually left where I was before, which is Ilford in what is now East London. Met my wife, married, and we moved into where I am now, which is in a district called Hendon in northwest London. I'm about 6 miles northwest of Piccadilly Circus. Any of you familiar with London on the Edgware branch of the Northern Line? And what I have here, it's a small garden. It's only about 50 foot square. And as you may have seen, it's dominated by an enormous oak tree. There's a 250-year-old oak tree, which is in the corner of my garden, and actually over the back fence where the park is, there's another huge chestnut tree. So it's not really great for putting up antennas in terms of towers and beams and things, because there's just too much coverage in the garden. There isn't enough space.
Sure.
So when I decided to get back on the air, as I say, I was off from about 78 when I got married through to about 1980. Brought the gear over here and thought, well, I wonder how it works. And this was right at the top of the sunspot cycle. And I strung a dipole, a 15-meter dipole, almost that I could almost touch it. It was kind of from about 10 feet high. Loaded it up, everything seemed to load up, the rig worked, the linear came on, everything was fine. Listened around on 15 and actually heard a station in Tonga, an A35, and called him and he came back. So, okay, this looks like it's a reasonable location. What I've got, we're about 2/3 of the way up a very shallow hill. We're about 200 feet above sea level. At the back, I have a park, which gives me completely open. It's completely open to the sort of western side of the western half of the compass, southwest north. Not bad in the other directions as well. So I've never ever tried to put up a tower or anything like that here. Had a couple of verticals. I had a button up once, but I basically got a whole load of wire antennas, which work quite well. So obviously I worked a lot of DX when I was active with the big station in East London.
Yeah.
But since I've been here, I have worked every country, 340 I think now, which including North Korea and including some of the other nasty ones. The North Korea story is not bad actually, if we have time later on. I have worked 5-band WAS, which is working all states on 10, 15, 20, 40 and 80. I have worked 5-band WAZ, which is all 40 zones on 10, 15, 20, 40 and 80, and that is also all on single sideband. So that is all with this relatively modest station. So I've written a bit about this over the years and done the odd talk, because what I want to say to people is, yes, I would love to have an 80-foot tower with a 6-element beam on the top. But
wouldn't we all?
Yeah, well, one or two people I know in Northern Ireland have got better than that, but you know, it's not really possible, and certainly not in the London suburbs. I think I've lasted about 5 minutes. So it is possible to do it more easily, and what you need are simple antennas, but correctly cut, installed as high as you can get them, and you do need some power as well. If you're not using power, you're going to find this very hard. So from this location, I had an old SB200 for many years. When the Expert amplifiers came out, I bought the Expert 1K, had one of those secondhand, upgraded it to a new one, and then have just gone on to this 1.5K, which is a extremely high-tech machine, talks beautifully to the transceiver, and you know, I hope this station will be with me for a long time. So I've kind of specialized in working a lot of DX with simple antennas. So for argument's sake, yesterday, I have a thing around August the 12th every year, my anniversary. I try to do WAC, work to all continents in one day. No big deal, but you know, it means you've got to be able to work around the world. But of course, anybody on the HF bands knows conditions are pretty dreadful at the moment. I actually tried to do it on the 12th, but I did not hear a single station from Oceania. Nothing, heard nothing from Oceania all day, not a YB, not a VK, nothing. So I worked the other 5 continents. But yesterday I was actually working, this is the position I work in, and came down in the morning, I was a little bit early, turned on 40 meters and heard a rather loud ZL4. Called him, had a nice contact. My 40 meter antenna is actually quite good. It's a full size delta loop with the top at about 40 feet. So that's not a bad antenna. At which point I thought, okay, well, I've got the hard one. I'll try and collect the rest through the day. So in various intervals at work, I listened, and it was all pretty awful. I worked at European, obviously. And then in the afternoon, things improved a bit, and I worked an HZ1 in Saudi Arabia, and then a UA0 in Siberia, which was Asia. Was listening to Africa's often a difficult one, and I could hear a pile up on SZ9VU in S79VU in the Seychelles. Couldn't hear him. Listening and just could not hear him. And then I suddenly hear a reasonably strong ZS working in Italian station. So they finished the contact. I called this guy, managed to move him off frequency. I've nice contact with him. So that's the ZS. So that's 4 of them. It's got Africa. Then for a while I was trying to call actually a KL7 who was coming through quite well, surprisingly, in Alaska, but there were a lot of people calling him, just couldn't get through. There was an LU9 I could just about hear for South America. Couldn't, again, rather weak, couldn't get him, but tuned up the band. There was a PR7 in Brazil, worked him easily. So that's number 5. And then had some dinner, came on again about 9 o'clock local time, and there's a rather loud V2 on 20 meters, so worked him. So that was the 6 continents in the day. And then interspersed with that, worked, I think, a Mauritania station, a 5T5, a 5Z4, a TZ on 17 and 20 CW. Later on, 9Z4, Trinidad, the same V2 on 40 meters. So what I'm saying is that's not a bad spread of DX on a day when conditions are poor. You're never going to be top of the pile-ups. You're never going to kick the door in. But by a combination of experience and other things as well, I am quite willing to email some of them and ask them for a sked, for argument's sake, if it's something I want. I worked Kosovo on 10 meters for the first time at the weekend. Worked it on all the other bands, but not on 10. Worked one of the, heard a Z62 station on 20 a couple of days earlier. Said, would he be willing to do a 10-meter sked? Yes, he would. So we made 2, one for 11 o'clock local time and one for 1:30. Set the rig up about an hour earlier, called CQ once or twice, band completely dead. Then I was in the kitchen half an hour before the sked, and I can suddenly hear the guy calling me. So that was my country number 331 on 10 meters. So it's a combination of experience, maybe a little bit of cheek, being fairly quick on your feet. Obviously, I use the cluster and things like that.
Yeah.
Another thing I would strongly recommend to anybody working DX, get a job where you can be home during the week. I have always worked peculiar shifts, and I've never worked a regular 5-day week. I work all sorts of peculiar hours and times, but I have always had time off during the week. It is very much easier if you're not stuck with Saturdays and Sundays.
Absolutely. So you have a load of wires out the back garden there, the end-fed wires, and they're your working conditions and everything else, and you put them over the trees out the back. So you make use of your natural environment, and you subscribe to the fact that you don't need big beams and towers. I'll tell you a wee story, and then I'll ask you a question. There's an amateur quite close to our clubhouse, and he uses a wire antenna, and it goes across the public street beside his house, and he just has it tied onto a lamppost. Well, all the neighbours had seen the wire going out the side of the house until a lamppost, and I can see George looking here because he knows what story I'm going to tell here. Well, the neighbours began to come out and would be pointing and everything else, and what's this doing? And they weren't complaining that he was using the lamppost. They thought he had been stealing electricity, and they were complaining that they weren't giving him any, and that he was keeping it all for himself, and he was using electricity from the lamppost. But when you put up the wires and from the trees, did you get any questions from the neighbours or anything else, Laurie?
Absolutely not. And one reason is everything is contained on my property. It's not, this is actually a work computer, and I keep getting messages coming through on it. Everything is contained on my property. My tree, that big oak tree that you saw, that is my tower. There is a bough which goes across at about the 40-foot level, and I've got 3 ropes over that, which I've had tree climbers put up. And you can pull up anything, all sorts of things. So what I have got, there are, I think it's 5 antennas up there in a very small area, and this in itself creates its own problems. But I have got it's actually a commercial antenna made by an American firm called Alpha Delta. It's a tri-band dipole for 10, 15, and 20. It's a fan doublet, three dipoles on one feed line. Works fine. I mean, is it better than is it as good as single dipoles? I'm honestly not sure, but it works fine. I work lots on it. I've got a similar thing made actually in Spain by a firm called EA Antennas, which they've been advertising a fair bit, which covers 6, 12, 17, and 30. Now, I do a bit on 6. I don't do much on 6, but 30 is a very useful DX band because it's often open when nothing else is. 12 and 17 are useful. So that is actually 4 antennas on one feed line. I have got the 40-meter delta loop I mentioned earlier. Excellent antenna, very, very simple, basically a 141-foot triangle of wire fed in the corner with some coax. No, people do complicated matching things, but I don't bother. That has accounted for about 320 countries on 40 meters, mostly on sideband. So it's a serious antenna. Also works on 20, also works on 15, even works on top band. Don't ask me why, I have no idea, but if it works, it works. I have got an inverted L for 80 meters, which is a wire, basically goes 40 feet vertical, and then the 20 feet sort of comes away at an angle. Quarter wave inverted L, fed at the bottom with 52 ohm coax, works fine. Also works on 17, works on 20. Again, I very rarely ask questions when antennas work in peculiar ways. I'm perfectly happy.
They work, and that's it. That's the great conditions.
The other guy can hear me. I'm not going to ask too many questions why. I mean, it's not quite as hit and miss as that sounds, but you know, that's what I think. And the other thing I've got is one I use now and then. It's actually a vertical dipole. I'm a great believer in vertical dipoles. They're useful antennas, and it gets the important part of the antenna up high as well. A two dipole thing for 10 and 12, again with spacers, single coax. That also works very well on 6. I've no idea why it works on 6, but it works quite well on 6. So with those 5 antennas, I'm covered on everything from 160 to 6.
Fantastic.
And on most bands, I've got 2 alternatives as well. So the 10, 15 and 20 meter dipole runs west to east, so it favors north and south. Obviously, north is good for the Pacific and south good for Africa. It kind of slopes a bit, so it's not bad to the east as well. It's not much use to the west. But the 40 meter delta loop is end on to the west. It's actually a 2 wavelength loop on 20, and that gives me some gain to the west. So I'm covered on most bands with 2 antennas as well. The whole lot, I could, not counting the coax, I could replace the whole lot probably for a tenner. If it falls down, so it falls down. It's a bit of wire and a bit of string. But it works. And 1 or 2 friends said, you know, why don't you put a small beam up or something? And I said, because I think actually what I've got, and the point is they are mostly full-sized antennas, even though they may be quite ordinary antennas, probably works just as well. So that's been my philosophy at this location for a long time now.
Absolutely. And great working conditions, great contacts, obviously, working all the continents and everything else, and we'll move on to the DXCC and everything else later on. But I want to go back a few years, Laurie, and I suppose some people will automatically recognize you with the whole Falkland Islands thing, but your actual adventure, shall we call it, of making contact in conflict starts well before that, even well before you were a correspondent. Can we talk a wee bit about the Jordanian conflict and everything else there?
Sure. I mean, I've had an interesting time of things. I've been a professional journalist now for 46 years, would you believe? There's not many people can say that. And I've done all sorts of stories. I've done wars, I've done riots, I've done everything in Northern Ireland, from really nasty stuff to the Clinton visit, to the peace process, to the whole Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern, Trimble thing, right through to more recent times. And so that is my job, covering the news, covering stories. And I have been a reporter, I've been a producer, I've been on TV news and so on. My first appearances on what was then Scene Around 6 in Northern Ireland was in 1976. If you Google my name, Laurie Margolis plus Ulster plus Donkey, it will throw up an extraordinary piece that I did about a lady on a farm in County Fermanagh back in 1976. I was there as a trainee, a trainee reporter, working to a wonderful news editor, a guy called Robin Walsh, who I think is still around, and worked on the normal Ulster stories, as you can imagine, for 2 months. But the last week or so I was there, he gave me a big file of stories, vague ideas they had, and said, Laurie, I'll give you a camera crew, give you a picture editor, get me 3 or 4 stories out of this lot. And one of them was about this donkey in remotest County Fermanagh called Fanny. And the story was that this lady lived on a farm sort of about 2 miles off the main road, a dairy farm. She had a few dairy cows, produced milk every day. There was Fanny the donkey. There was a little wooden cart that Fanny the donkey pulled along. She would put the milk churns on the back of the cart. The donkey would, of its own accord, walk up to the main road, wait for the milk tanker to come along. The milk tanker took the churns, either poured them into his tank or replaced them with other churns, I'm not sure. Turned the donkey around, sent it back down the track, and this worked perfectly. And I thought, what a lovely story. And we go along there, and it was a gorgeous day, which is not always the case in far western County Fermanagh, but it was a lovely day in August. And this lady was there, and I mean, I have got to be honest, I could barely understand a word she was saying. Most extraordinary rural western County Fermanagh accent. But anyway, we got along fine. And she talked, and she was great. And I was working with a very good cameraman as well, who kind of got into this story. And what we wanted to do, obviously, was film the donkey walking up to the road, waiting for the van to come along, and then walking back again. Trouble was, this was in the days of film, first of all, so not videotape. So with film, that was expensive. You couldn't shoot miles of stuff and just take the best. You had to be quite economical in what you were shooting. And with one camera, you have to stop and start processes. So you may get the donkey walking, it goes out of shot, you want to stop it, you maybe want some shots of the wheels going around, the donkey from behind. Well, the poor donkey got really fed up with this, and her normal journey being stopped time and time again by these idiots with cameras. So in the end, the donkey just walked off to the end of the road. And anyway, we got the story. I did it. I remember at the time it actually got onto national television, the old Nationwide programme ran it nationally. And completely forgot. Well, I didn't forget about it, but certainly it disappeared into history until about 3 or 4 years ago, when I suddenly start getting emails from friends, work colleagues all over Northern Ireland saying, "Seen this piece, it's fantastic. I've never seen anything so funny." I said, "What on earth are you talking about?" And it turned out somebody had gone through looking for kind of archive pieces about Ulster life. And I think a combination of the donkey, this woman, milk churns, the whole thing, they thought this encapsulates a bit of Ulster life. And it went on to some special website with this story on it. So suddenly people started seeing it. So anyway, I forgot how we got to that. Yeah, so the range of stories I've done.
We have a few people who actually live in Fermanagh here with us this evening, Laurie. So you never know. They probably know exactly the donkey you're talking about.
I can't remember the name of the village, but listen to ski somewhere out there. It was way out in the boom, beautiful country there, but way out in the boondocks. But it was great fun, and the piece made quite an impression. So that is one end of what I do. At the other end, I have actually, unusually for a journalist, been involved as the subject of actually 3 major stories in my life, where 2 of them certainly were world-class international stories. One of them was rather more dramatic and also, unfortunately, has a Northern Ireland connection. We can get that later. So 1970, I have just finished my first year as an electronic engineering student at one of the small London colleges. And I have gone to the States to work for the summer as a camp counselor, as people do, working at a camp in Pennsylvania. And to be honest, it wasn't a great summer. The job didn't work out. Actually, it's the only job I've ever been fired from, but I eventually found something I preferred doing. I made a mess of my exams. So instead of coming back at the end of September and going into the second year at university, I had to come back early to do some resits. So instead of coming back on about September the 25th, I came back on September the 5th, 1970. 1970, Jordan. The PLO and the Jordanian army were virtually at war. This was, if you remember, and we're coming into this now, Black September. Black September was what the Palestinians called September because it was when the PLO forces got wiped out by the Jordanian forces. So it's ever known as Black September. If you remember the hijackings to Dawson's Field, 3 passenger jets were hijacked to an old RAF airbase in Jordan and were blown up by the Palestinians. So it was complete anarchy there. And Jordan, of course, at the time was ruled by King Hussein. Now, King Hussein was a very keen radio amateur. He discovered the hobby about a year before, had the call sign JY1, JY being Jordan, and he was undoubtedly number 1. He was very active on the air. And I worked him in March. And to be honest, at the time, of course, I was interested to work the King of Jordan. It was actually a new country for me. I'd never worked Jordan before. So had a lovely contact with him, and he was polite and seemed as interested to work me as I was to work him. And obviously, every time he came on, it caused a bit of a sensation because this guy was really famous. He was, one of the most famous figures in the Middle East and very famous worldwide. And so we had a chat, and my father, who was G3NMR, was also a keen DXer. He came down and worked him. And I've actually just dug out the QSL card that he sent me at the time. Now, I don't know if this shows up.
Very good, yes.
Laminated. And what makes me smile about this card is if you look at the back, as you can see, there's a long handwritten message. And the message, I will need to put my glasses on to read. G3UML, March the 20th, 1970, 1509, 14 megahertz SSB. Only gave me 5 and 5, which wasn't great. It was a pleasure for me to contact you, my very good friend. I hope we will have future contacts. Kindly accept my best wishes and regards. Sincerely, Hussein. Well, you imagine the King of Jordan making a lot of contact. So I remember at the time thinking, if he's going to write QSL cards at that length, the guy's going to be spending his life writing out QSL cards. Anyway, had the contact, got my JY1 QSO, came direct from Jordan in an embossed envelope covered with stamps and everything, and pleased to get it. So September 1970, I am back in London, frankly feeling a bit grumpy because I've got to do these exams and I've come back early and from the States and one thing and another. And I am listening round. My parents have gone to bed upstairs about 11:30 one night. And the Jordanian thing has started. I was aware that the Jordanian civil war had started. Communications were cut off. There were no phones. There were no telexes. There were no faxes. Email wasn't to be invented for 15 years. The internet wasn't to be invented for 15 years. The information coming out of the place was very sketchy. I am tuning across 20 meters and I suddenly hear this enormous signal, JY1, chatting away to a friend in the States. So it's extraordinary. He had a very loud signal. He had a Drake station with a Drake L4B, and he had a big beam on his palace in Amman, another station down in Aqaba. He took it really seriously. He enjoyed it. Chatting away to this friend in the States. And I'm listening, and I thought, this is extraordinary. There's the king, the country's at war, and he's there chatting on 20 meters. So I went up. Now, I should explain, my mother, Laurie Margolis, was quite a well-known media figure in Britain. She did a lot of work for BBC Radio, appeared on programmes like Woman's Hour and the Today programme. So she was involved with the business. She worked for BBC local radio and did a lot of magazine journalism as well. So she was quite well known. People from that era still remember her. And I went in the bedroom. I said, if you were the King of Jordan, and your country was in the middle of a civil war and, your throne was at risk, would you really be chatting on 20 meters? So she thought about this. Anyway, she rang the Today programme with the Radio 4, which, as it is now, was a fairly major news source on BBC Radio. And they thought, wow. Anyway, first thing next morning, their radio car is outside the door. I didn't speak to him that night. First thing the next morning, their radio car is outside the door, and we play some tape of the transmission that I'd recorded, and we have a chat with me, and the story goes on and on. And we're now on about September the 17th. So this is the Jordanian war has been going on for some time. And again, if you look at the papers at the time, and I've got a lot of the papers, there is stuff coming from Cyprus. There is stuff coming from Beirut. There is stuff coming from Cairo. There is stuff coming from Israel. There is nothing coming out of Jordan at all. Absolutely nothing. There were no journalists there, or if there were journalists there, they couldn't broadcast. Anyway, there I am, and I hear King Hussein on again, working, and I call him, and he remembered me, and we have a chat, and you can actually, again, if you Google me plus Hussein, and I only discovered this a few months ago, there is on there a clip of video, actually, ironically, from ITN, of me having one of these contacts, and it's I had never seen it. There were no such things as VCRs in those days. You couldn't record television, so I had audio recordings, but I'd never seen this stuff. So I contact him. We ring the media again, ring newspapers and television, and the story goes crazy. And for several days, we have got BBC cameras in the house. We've got ITN cameras in the house. We have got French television. We've got American television. We have got the British newspapers. And if you look at the front pages, obviously the main story is the war, but they've all got a piece about this radio ham. And the point is, I should say, I'm Jewish. Obviously, he was a Muslim, so there was a little kind of thing there. This 20-year-old student in a very nondescript part of East London called Ilford, and believe me, it ain't Beverly Hills or anywhere, and talking to the King of Jordan, and it was a really unusual story, and it got a lot of coverage, a great deal of coverage. Would have had even more these days, I think. But the point is, these days, a place wouldn't be cut off. Their emails would come out, texts would come out, something would come out. The only stuff that was coming out of Jordan was King Hussein talking to me. What were we talking about? Well, to be honest, it was just stuff about how they were, it was very difficult, and everybody was fighting and doing their best, and they hoped something better would come out of it. And the guy was clearly completely wiped out with fatigue, but nevertheless was clearly enjoying just being able to talk to people. And the other thing was, his wife was he at that time he was married to an English woman, and she was in London with their children. So he asked me to pass on a couple of messages for her, which I did through the embassy. Wow. Anyway, this goes on for 3 or 4 days, and TV crews, and it's going on TV, and I'm invited onto a few TV programs. And as I say, this was before I was a broadcast journalist, 4 years before.
Yeah.
And then the story went a bit quiet, and it was he wasn't on so much, and I think 1 or 2 journalists were getting in there, and the story basically was dying away a bit, and I also had to worry about passing these damned exams as well. So I was sort of going into college, and people were saying, "Saw you on television, what on earth are you doing?" And then about a couple of weeks later, it was the early evening program. Again, older listeners may remember there used to be a program called Nationwide. The beginning of it was the local program. So in the case of Northern Ireland, it was seen around 6 in those days. And then the back half of it was national. And it was a widely watched program, went out at 6 o'clock on BBC One, 6 till 7, very widely watched program. They wanted to come and do some filming about amateur radio, and I said, okay. They said, do you think King Hussein will come up? I said, I've not heard him for 7 or 8 days. I said, so I'm really not sure. I think he's frankly got bigger fish to fry. And they come in, and they've been busy all day, and they set up, and they clearly thought, this wasn't great. And I set the rig up, and I think I worked a couple of stations. And then suddenly, blasting signal, G3UML, Juliet Yankee 1. Wow. I thought there was like a shot of adrenaline went through the room, and I said, it's him. So back, hello, sir, how are you? And great to talk to you, and I hope everything is well. And again, frankly, a fairly non-consequential conversation, but the cameras were there recording it as it was happening. And they made quite a big deal of it the following night, because this thing had just come out of the blue. It really shocked me. And his signal was so loud and so clear, and it was still in the middle of the story. Story moves on a little bit further. Eventually he wins the war. The PLO are smashed in Jordan and have never really functioned in Jordan ever since. They ended up in Beirut and then were thrown out of Beirut by the Israelis, and now, of course, there is a Palestinian entity which comes out of the PLO. Not very satisfactory for them, but better than nothing. Anyway, the story moves on a bit, and King Hussein he is exhausted, and he comes for medical treatment to London. And he's in a small clinic in the West End, actually very near where I now work. Beam up on the roof. You can do his call, I think it was G5 Alpha Tango, either Alpha Tango Mike or Alpha Tango November. Beam up on the roof in the West End. I mean, I wouldn't get away with it, but you can do this if you're a king. And he's on the air from his hospital bed. And my father and I get an invite up to see him. An extraordinary moment, really. We were in this little, fairly modest hospital room with the King of Jordan, nobody else, me, my dad. He's there in his dressing gown with a few, I remember he had a lot of sort of war history books on his shelf. His rig is there, and we're chatting with him in this hospital room. And I must emphasize, it maybe, younger people have forgotten him. This guy was a really big deal.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then another thing. The following year, I was in Israel, and I was operating a contest from a very big station, 4Z4HF, right up on the Lebanese border in northern Israel, and working away and calling CQ and working lots of stations. And I remember one afternoon, there were a few other Israeli amateurs in the room listening to me. And suddenly there's this blasting signal. "Hello, my very good friend, how are you?" And I was a bit slow. I said, "Sorry, who's that?" And he said, "It's your good friend to the east." And it was him. Again,
Wow.
although he was some distance away, because he was on a hill and I was on a hill, the signal was huge. And of course, the Israelis nearly fainted. I mean, they couldn't believe it. It was actually breaking Israeli radio law, because you weren't allowed to talk to Arab countries. And certainly the Jordanians were not allowed to talk to Israel in those days. But, and we had this brief contact, and I said, it's great to talk to you. I said, we have some local people in here listening. And he came up, "I wish you all the very best, and I hope, that things will be good between us." So the story kept following me around, and quite often, if there was something involving King Hussein, I get rang up by a few of the papers, and this story kept following me around. And then 1999, he dies.
Yeah.
And at very short notice, I write a piece for CQ magazine. I've often written for the American Amateur Radio magazine. And they run it. And then it is picked up by a magazine in the States called Harper's, which is a kind of a posh Reader's Digest. It's a magazine which takes articles from all sorts of other newspapers, magazines all over the place, and runs excerpts from them. And they asked me if they could pick up a bit of my piece from CQ, and I said, well, it's a bit obscure. It's aimed at an amateur radio market. They said it's absolutely fine, and they run this piece, and saw it, didn't think much else of it. End up going into work in 1999, bright sunny morning, Sunday morning. I get into work at 7:30 at the old Television Centre building in West London. I'd not been in for a few days. Open my emails, and there's an email there from a firm in Hollywood called Brillstein. Never heard of them. "Dear Mr. Margolis, we have read your story in Harper's Magazine. We were fascinated by it. We think it has the basis for a motion picture. Would you be interested in pursuing this?" I thought, this is a friend taking the mickey. I go further down my emails, and there's one from Universal Studios. Well, I've certainly heard of Universal Studios. Virtually the same kind of thing. "Mr. Margolis, amazing story. We really would like to talk to you about developing this as a movie." So I'm thinking, who's going to play me?
Yeah.
I tell my wife, and she says, "Yes, dear, of course they want to make a movie about you." And initially I thought it was a wind-up. Actually, it wasn't. Now, to be honest, it never went anywhere. The Hollywood studios, they're looking for stories all the time. I spoke to them. I never quite felt there was enough in there for a film. And I think they sort of, in the end, they said, look, maybe talk to a British film company about it. I never did anything further about it. There's been one or two. There was some television interest a few years ago, and it never went any further. So that is the JY1 story. And this is a story where entirely due to amateur radio, and involving me, because I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and maybe even though I wasn't a journalist, I had a kind of nose for a story at that stage. You didn't have to be brilliant to work out this was a good story, but that was number one. Now, it is the 50th anniversary of that coming up in a few weeks. So
Okay.
September the 17th, 2020 will be the 50th anniversary of my contact. I've done actually another piece which will be in CQ. If any of you see it, or it may well be online, and I will probably do some stuff for the BBC website as well. So
we'll definitely be looking out for those articles, and we'll share them on our website as well, because
Sure.
they're fantastic. I mean, I did laugh, when you were saying about the adrenaline, because I feel that when I get a contact locally, never mind a contact with a Jordanian. And when I walk into the hospital, I'm told to switch off my mobile phone. But I must remember, you can set up a beam on the roof and have the amateur station beside your bed. But maybe that's just royalty that gets away with that. But fantastic.
Yeah, no, when you're when you're known as His Majesty, you get away with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on a few years then, Laurie, obviously you joined the BBC and you become a journalist and everything else, and you're sent off to this wee country in the UK that we locally call Northern Ireland, and you
Yeah.
end up here, is that right?
Yeah, well, I reckon I was thinking back over it. My first trip to Northern Ireland was May 1976. My last trip to Northern Ireland was March 2019. So is that 43 years?
Yeah.
I reckon I must have been there 30 or 40 times over the years. When I was training, I was a BBC News trainee, which was a course for people they felt had the ability to sort of go the distance. And part of this was doing attachments to various newsrooms. And Northern Ireland, of course, was a huge story then, as none of you need me to remind you. And I really wanted to go there. The story fascinated me. It really, really interested me. And so I came over in May 76, was there for 4 months. It was a pretty rough time then. I mean, I remember I came over on the ferry from Liverpool and arrived about 6 o'clock the following morning, and you came off the ferry and driving towards the Ormo Road, where Ormo Avenue, where our studios were. And, you know, there were army patrols going up and down, and military patrols and semi-armored vehicles going around. And, you know, there was stuff going bang virtually every day. It was pretty intense. And I saw loads of the country. I mean, I was just all over the country. All sorts of different stories. I remember one I remember, not Fanny the Donkey, but Billy Connolly, the great Scottish comedian.
Yeah.
He was very friendly with a guy called Phil Coulter from Derry, who wrote the song Puppet on a String. And Phil Coulter had a home he was from Derry, but he had a home in Donegal. And Billy Connolly was doing, I think it was the first live show in Derry for years. Coulter had obviously spoken to the right people and had got permission for Connolly to do this show. And I remember coming over and doing a long interview with Connolly in Coulter's home in Donegal about that. So that sort of story. And then there was a gap of about 7 or 8 years when I was working mostly on foreign news, so I wasn't in Northern Ireland. Then I became a BBC radio reporter. And I mean, there are so many stories, but again, one of my favourites is I was staying, this would have been about 1986, something like that. I was staying in the Europa Hotel, and at the time there was always a London network reporter working in Belfast to do the story for the London network, because Belfast was so busy doing their own programmes that they couldn't really devote the resources to doing it for the London network. So I was over there on the Belfast the Belfast Watch, which we all enjoyed doing. Was going to bed it was a Sunday night, and listening to the midnight news, I think, and there was this story of a enormous great ore carrier about to run onto the rocks off Skibbereen, down Towhead, down in the southwest of the Republic. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, oh, heck, this is a really good story. And I'm at the wrong end of Ireland, but anyway, I'm closer than most other people. And I rang my newsroom and said, look, this is a long way away, but if I start driving now, I can probably be there by dawn and do some stuff I'm assuming the thing is visible from the shoreline. I said, no, it's all right. Well, we'll do it we have a correspondent in Dublin. We'll do it from Dublin. 6 o'clock in the morning, the phone goes, Laurie, can you get to Skibbereen? Whoa. I said, well, I'll have to think about this. Well, can't you fly down? I said, no, there were no scheduled air services in those days between the north and the south at all. Well, how long would it take you to drive? I said, it will take me about 7 or 8 hours, I guess, probably more than that. But I will be there by mid-afternoon, but it's not great. Could you charter a plane down there? I don't know. I never chartered a plane before. I will ask. So I rang the Belfast newsroom, one of the news editors there, and they said, yeah, there's this firm who will charter planes. God knows what it will cost, but still. So I charter this little plane and we fly the length of Ireland at 2,000 feet. Wonderful journey in this very nice little 2-seater propeller jet. I arrive at Cork Airport about 10 o'clock in the morning. Go to hire a car, and the Avis guy says, oh, I'm sorry, so we've only got one car, a Mercedes. So I can't, BBC man can't start hiring Mercedes. He says, I'll do it for the price of a Cortina or something like that. Fine. Off I go in this brand new Merc and tool down to Skibbereen, go onto the cliff top, and there is this enormous ship, clearly not at all happy. He's kind of ski with a couple of miles off the shore, not a couple of miles, probably a half a mile off the shore, looking not happy at all. And I thought, well, I want to try and get closer to this thing. It was radio, but even so, you want to sort of be close to describe the thing. How the hell, where do I get a boat? So then a kid comes cycling past and, what are you doing, mister? And I said, well, reporter, BBC reporter. I said, do you know anybody who's got a boat who might take me out there? He said, I'll tell you, he said, there's a bunch of English people who are living a kind of like hippies down on a beach nearby. And I think they've got a fishing boat and they might take you out there. So, okay, fine. It's just a shame. So he left his bike there and jumped in the car and we drive down to this place. And there's this rather posh, clearly drug-addled bunch of Brits, sort of speaking terribly well, but clearly off their heads and, living the hippie life quietly there. And they had this fishing boat. And I said, can you take me out? So we agreed a fee. And out we go in this horrible boat, literally, so I could virtually touch the thing. And did the thing and went back to Skibbereen that night and thought, well, I've hired a plane, I've rented a car, I've hired a boat. The only thing I haven't rented is a train so far, but maybe that'll come along as well. So this kind of thing kept happening in Northern Ireland at all. On a much more serious note, when Clinton came in '95, I produced the whole of the Clinton trip, which was an amazing thing because basically we wanted him in shot wherever he was. So he did a lot in Belfast. He did a huge thing in Derry.
That's right.
He went down to Dublin. He ended up on the west coast of the Republic. So that was an enormous thing. Then there was a later Clinton trip, which he really got into the story, and I think saw it as one of his major achievements, getting that peace process kick-started. And so did that. Did the whole peace process through all the stuff on the waterfront in Belfast with Blair and Bertie Ahern and Trimble, and then when the power sharing thing started. So I've probably worked more intensively in Northern Ireland than any other part of Britain. Love coming over there. I never stop laughing when I'm there. Wonderful sense of humour, beautiful country, and I have to say, maybe not quite such a good story, but a darn sight happier place than it was when I first came in 1976.
Absolutely. And Laurie, did you get to play any amateur radio while you were over here? Did you visit anywhere or any clubs? Or
to be honest, not much. Now these call signs you probably wouldn't remember, but G3UML, Dick, does that mean anything to any of you?
There's a few people shaking heads there, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I believe Dick is still around. I knew him basically because he blew the windows out every time he came on the air. Dick had an incredible station near Dungannon. He had, I think it was 3 140-foot towers. He had a full-size 4-element beam on 40. He had enormous antennas on the other band. He had a top band dipole at something like 120 feet. He had 80-meter antennas, an incredible station. I mean, I remember listening to him here, and I was always quite good on 40, but you would listen to Dick about on a winter's morning, maybe 9, 10 o'clock, clearly with his beam pointing over the North Pole, just knocking off JAs, KH6s. I think, my goodness me. The other one I knew very well, Cedric Gi3IVJ, who eventually went out and lived out in Madeira, CT3FT. He was a good friend. He lived just above Belfast and then moved out to Madeira. GI0KOW, now I've lost track of him. He was down in South Armagh, another big station. He did very well in some of the contests and had this huge tower in South Armagh, which caused a bit of interest amongst some people, but he got on with his life and had a great station. I've only operated very briefly from there, not very much, but hopefully sometime.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, if you do manage to make your way back to Northern Ireland, would love to have you up at the club. Obviously, when this whole pandemic and everything else calms down. But if you do manage to get back
Yeah,
here, Laurie, do make contact, and would love to have you here. But we're moving on in the
lovely.
years. We're moving on in the years
Mhm.
to, we're getting into the early 80s here, and sort of maybe one of the more famous stories that people know about you, and the whole Falkland Islands thing. Did your
Yeah.
bosses sort of know you were an amateur? How did that whole process start, or how did it come around?
I never kept it a secret, but I think people just thought, eccentric hobby. So the Falklands story, I should say, by the way, a lot of people think I went there. I have never been to the Falklands. Didn't have to. So we are now in the end of March 1982, the very end of March 1982. I've been working for the BBC for 8 years, and I'm actually working in Israel. I've gone there to make a program about life on the northern border and on the Golan Heights, a Radio 4 half-hour program. And I was travelling a fair bit, and I'd done, done quite a bit in the Middle East and so on. And I had a day off at the end, so I was due to come back. I think it was on whatever day it was, and my air ticket. I gathered all I could for my program. So I spent a day touring around, and I was driving around on the Golan Heights and listening to the BBC World Service, talking about this strange story about Argentine scrap metal merchants turning up on South Georgia and running up the Argentine flag. And, well, okay, it was very odd. Didn't think much more of it. Came back on April the 1st, woke up on April the 2nd, turned on the radio, and the story is that we think something has happened on the Falklands. We didn't know what. Anyway, I had a pile of tapes, and I was going into the office and was going to edit a half-hour program. Involves a great deal of material, and was going to start listening through my tapes and start putting this program together. And I walk into the old BBC newsroom in Broadcasting House. The building is still there, and actually our new newsroom, that one you see on the front of the news, is kind of an enormous thing tagged onto the back, but that building is still there. And as I'm walking down the corridor into the newsroom, I can tell there's like people are running around and shouting and screaming. And they see me and they come flying over to me. Now, let me explain it. Any of you who've been to London may know this, but Broadcasting House is in Regent Street, just north of Oxford Circus. Over the road is a building which is now the Langham Hotel. Big, beautiful Edwardian building. But at the time, it was a rather sad BBC office block called the Langham Building. It had been hit by a bomb during the war and botched up, and it was just a rather dreary building full of a lot of BBC bureaucrats, frankly. But on the top was a Radio Shack. So the aerial radio group had a call sign G3AYC. They had a room full of rubbish and old junk and magazines, you can just imagine, right on the top of the Langham Hotel. They had a beam on the top, a 3-element tribander, probably about 150 feet above the ground, and they had a bit of power, and it was good. I used it. It was good. It was a good station. It worked very well. Decent signals. They said to me, Laurie, is there any way with your radio you can get in touch with the Falklands? We don't know what's going on. There's no phones. We got one message from Cable and Wireless saying something like, we have new friends, but we don't know whether they've been taken over. The government doesn't know. No knows what the heck is going on. So I don't know. I'll go up there. So I take myself, put my tape somewhere, take myself up into this scruffy old room and start. This is about 10:30 in the morning. And I start listening around, and I'm listening and listening and listening, and sort of 20 meters, 15 meters. I thought if anything happens, it's probably going to be on 15. And about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I hear a voice, and I think, hello. And it's a kind of Falklands accent, a slightly West Country accent. And I thought, I know that voice. And he's talking away, and he is clearly talking to, I can't remember who it was, but someone else in Britain about, there's been an invasion and one thing and another. And I think, blimey, this is, talk about the horse's mouth. This is the horse. So I call him, and I realised who it was because I'd worked this guy before, and I just recognised the name. He was using his first name, obviously wasn't giving his call sign. And it was VP8LP, Bob McLeod, who is, I worked him last week. He's very active. He's in Port Stanley now. But at the time, he was in Goose Green. And the reason why he was able to keep broadcasting, keep on transmitting, was that the Argentinians had not yet reached Goose Green. They were in Stanley, but the rest of the islands hadn't been taken over yet. And I called him. I had a tape recorder running. And I said, "Hi, Bob." I said, "Laurie G3UML." I was using my own call. I said at the BBC, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Laurie," he said, "why is the BBC saying they don't know whether there's been an invasion?" He said, "There's a destroyer in the bay. There's Argentine troops all over town. There are the Marines were trying to defend Government House, but they've been taken captive. The governor has been taken captive. The broadcast station is broadcasting in Spanish. It's all over." Said they've taken over. They're here. Right. Okay. So I'm sort of digesting this and listening to the tapes. The next program that was on those days, the program still runs on Radio 4 at 4 o'clock, called the PM program, News and Current Affairs program. And I rang them, and I sort of down on the internal phone from the radio room, and I said, "I think I've got a bit of a story for you." I said, "I'm confirming for certain that it's all over." So they had me down on the beginning of the program, saying exactly what I've just heard. Destroyer in the bay, Argentine troops all over town, the governor's surrendered, the Argentine flag is flying over Port Stanley, broadcast stations broadcasting in Spanish. Did this at 5 p.m. on Radio 4, and played some of the tape of Bob. At that stage, the government was still saying they didn't know what had happened. They were in the Commons, and Lord Carrington, who was Foreign Secretary, because he was a Lord, he was actually appearing in the Lords rather than in the Commons. They were still saying they didn't know what had happened. They had nothing, no definite information. I go on there with this story, which causes a sensation. So I go back up to my radio room because I want to try and see what else is going on. Suddenly the phone, this dusty old phone goes, kind of dust coming off it. "Oh, Mr. Margolis, it's somebody from the Foreign Office." "Yes." I said, "I understand you've been talking to the Falklands, is that right?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Well, what are they telling you?" "Destroyer in the bay, Argentine troops all over town, broadcast station in Spanish, governor captured, 3 Argentine troops killed, gunfire, blah, blah, blah." "Right, okay, thank you very much." Half an hour later, Lord Carrington stands up in the House of Lords and pretty much repeats what I've said. About an hour after that, and I'd spoken to him a bit more and recorded a bit more stuff, and the story is, of course, running huge. About an hour after that, the phone goes, and it's my editor, who is, bless him, he's in his 80s now, lives in Spain, a buccaneering character called Larry Hodgson. Said, "Laurie," says, "come down to the office right away." I thought, oh my God, I've got it wrong. There's nothing, I've got the story completely wrong. I walk in there and he's only called a press conference. There's cameras, there's newspaper reporters, there's radio reporters, and there's me. Right, tell us what you know. And so went through that. So that went on for a couple of days, and Bob was already getting a little bit nervous about broadcasting because the Argentinians got to Goose Green, gave some people a fairly hard time. I don't think they gave him a particularly hard time. And then, of course, if you remember, there was a very violent battle for Goose Green where the Paras, I better get this right, I think it was the Paras, fought the Argentinians and captured Goose Green. So that again was the Falkland story. And to be honest, I kind of went through life always thinking, I just hope I got that right. I hope I got that story right. And I wasn't much more involved with the story. In fact, I ended up back in the Middle East because the Israelis invaded Lebanon, and there was the whole battle which ended up with the PLO being thrown out of Lebanon. And so I was from May that year right through into the summer. My first daughter was born on May the 26th. I saw her for about 3 days, and the whole time was commuting between Tel Aviv and Beirut. So I was not really involved in the Falkland story. Moving on, so the story is another story that keeps on coming up, and and biting me on the backside occasionally. The 25th anniversary in 2007, I did a piece, quite a nice piece actually, I just found on the BBC website. I wrote about it. Then in 2012, so we're 30 years afterwards, the government, as you probably know, release official papers.
That's right.
They release some after 30 years, some after 70 years, some will never be released, for argument's sake. Some of the ones involving the abdication of Edward VIII, apparently these are so sensitive they will never be released, as amazing as it sounds. Anyway, they release the papers, didn't think anything of it. They released them over Christmas time, just after Christmas. Phone goes, one of my colleagues at work, one of the reporters, I was just at home. And by this stage, having worked for the BBC for a very long time, I'd been there for 38 years. Laurie says, the Cabinet Papers? Yeah. He said, you're all over them. I said, what do you mean? He said, there's the Falklands Papers, and there is one, and I've got it here, which is basically their version of what you told them in that phone call. And there it was, typed out with sort of copied to all sorts of people, and obviously the security services, and goodness knows who would have seen this stuff in 1982. A radio ham at the BBC by name of Margolis, thank you very much, put me in my place, has been talking to the Falklands and warship in the Bay, Argentina. So that is the Falklands story. So that is the second major story that amateur radio, and it wouldn't have happened without amateur radio, that amateur radio has put me at the heart of. Again, a story of major conflict where communications broke down, and the only communications that didn't break down were amateur radio. Now, will this happen again? I guess it might. You may get countries where, Belarus, where the internet's all cut off and something like that, but it is increasingly unlikely because of there is so much communication around the world now, even to the most obscure places. I mean, I'll tell you my North Korea story later on if people are not falling asleep in their seats. But
I think we're all listening with attentive ears, Laurie. Had you any idea?
Let me just tell you the one other story that I actually became the subject of, rather than the reporter. Well, I became both actually. Unfortunately, has a Northern Ireland connection. 2001, the Continuity IRA are setting off things around London. Smallish devices, or one or two of them weren't so small. And there's a kind of a scare again, and this is the first time we had this for a long time. I am working a Saturday night in the old Television Centre building in Wood Lane, the famous circular building, and I am the overnight reporter. And the overnight news editor, sorry. And virtually everybody is gone. The 10 o'clock news goes out. I watch Match of the Day. The Sunday papers come in, and I prepare myself for a quiet night. It's just me and a camera crew. I prepare myself for a quiet night, just reading the papers and just keeping an eye on things. And we suddenly get a message from our security people: you've got to evacuate the front of the building. There's a suspect vehicle outside. And I'm thinking, that could be good. What's parked right outside over the road? My car, my fairly new Renault Laguna car. So anyway, everybody sort of is hustled back to the back of the building. And I'm thinking, we've got to cover this story. There's me and there's this cameraman. So I go and kind of look out the window, really stupid thing to do. And I can see this black cab is right outside the door with the flashes going and everything. And there's already some activity around it. Someone screams at me to get back from the windows. So I say to the cameraman, I said, John, we've got to try and get a shot of where this is. So we make our way across that whole complex, the Television Centre complex, and eventually managed to hole up in the multi-storey car park. As we were going there, the police saw us walking through and sort of screamed at us to get out of the way. And we find a kind of a site. It was actually 270 yards from where this cab was, but nevertheless, we had a good shot, cameraman there. And and I said to him, John, I said, there's no way if this thing goes off, this is an old Northern Ireland trick from the days of film, you've got to be running. You can't suddenly warm up. Now, what they used to do in the days of film in Northern Ireland, when the sort of building was going to blow up, they would film some of it, leave the camera on the tripod, leave their finger on the shutter release, And as soon as the thing went bang, they would press it, the camera would start up, there would be a flash, but that flash would sort of get mixed in with the flash of the bomb anyway. So that doesn't work with video, you can't do that. So I said, there's no option, you've just got to run. So he's running, and after about half an hour, it's 3/4 of an hour, it's now about 11:45, something like that. He said, Laurie, he says, I'm going to run out of batteries and run out of tape. So, okay, I'll have to try and work my way back into the building to find some batteries and some tape. Anyway, at that moment, we can see the robot is moving towards this cab. I said, John, run, for God's sake. I said, there's something going to happen here. Well, the thing blew. I've never heard a noise like it. Just an incredible, I think it was about 30 pounds of explosive in this cab. Blew the front of television centre out. I never saw, next time I saw my car within a picture on the front of the Times being lifted up by a crane onto a police vehicle. It was blown to smithereens. I never saw the car again. My insurance company actually paid for it as well, which surprised me. And that again, I think if you Google me plus TV Centre bomb, you will see this video. It's very, I have to say, sounds a bit macabre, it was one of the best bomb explosion pictures I've ever seen, because we were running. It was a huge thing. It was night.
I have seen it.
The third story where I became the subject of the story. Journalists don't normally like becoming the subjects of stories, and I sort of get that. But in these three cases, that's what happened.
3 times in the right location, at the right time, for these big stories. But just sort of slightly going back, whenever you were telling this story and the conference and everything else of what was going on in the Falklands, had you any idea that the information you were passing on was going to the highest echelons, or was it only after the 30-year release where you sort of realized?
No, I knew when the Foreign Office rang me that this was, this was a huge story. This was, you can look at the Falklands story. It was the story it was the thing that kept Margaret Thatcher in power for 10 years, because she was in trouble at that stage.
Yeah.
And she may well not have won the next election. So we'd had that whole thing. It was the last, well, I wouldn't say it was the last British thing overseas, because obviously we did Iraq and Afghanistan. But in terms of a kind of all British operation, it was the last time, and I can't see us doing that again because we haven't got the boats, but where we actually launched a force to go and defend somewhere. And it was, it was a massive story. It was a story. It was as big as coronavirus, and it's in a completely different way. Albeit, the pictures took time to come back, and it was all reported a bit behind the curve. But
yeah.
No, I was pretty certain. But did I get it right? I mean, the guy, I was confident in my source. You might say, how did he 50 miles away know what was going on? Because they have a big 2-meter net on the island. They still do. And as it was going on, people in Stanley were telling people outside on 2 meters what was going on.
Thank goodness for amateur radio. The communication strand that never failed, and you were able to pass that information on.
Yeah.
Laurie, I think we've got time, and I think people would love to hear, if you will, the North Korea story, because we've went around the world here, so why not?
All right, so this is a DX story. And this is an object lesson in how you do things when you don't have a 6-element beam on an 80-foot tower. All of a sudden, I think it was 2001, anyway, it was a fair time ago. I don't know how many of you are DXers, but North Korea is the holy grail. It is the one country that nobody had worked. There'd been only a couple of very sporadic operations from there, handful of people, and it was the one country, along with other people, that I had not worked, P5, and there was never much likelihood of it coming on. We suddenly get news of a station from North Korea, P5/4L4FN. Who is 4L4FN? He is a guy from the Soviet Georgia, what used to be the Georgia in the Caucasus,
yep.
Working for the World Food Programme, who is in Pyongyang, rather weirdly, has backing from the AMSAT organization in Texas, the amateur satellite. And I never quite understood how they got involved, but nothing to do with satellites. But anyway, they seem to sort of help him out with gear and stuff. This guy had somehow got permission to operate from Pyongyang. And I'm looking at this and think, wow, quite like to work this guy. And when he was coming on, he was getting just monstered, as you can imagine, just thousands of stations calling him. And he was only using a fairly, I think he had a Vertigo at the time. It was 2001. It was the peak of the sunspot cycle. Conditions were good. 10 meters was open, 15 meters was open. And I thought, well, how on earth, with my dipoles and relatively low power, how am I going to work this guy? So I had to think about it. And it was the fairly early days of email. But I went to the World Food Programme website and realized all the addresses on that website were so-and-so at wfp.org. So I thought, okay, maybe he's got email. He probably has there. He's working for this organization. So I send, it was Edisha Georgiadze or something. I just launch off this email to his name at wfp.org. Hi, Eddie. Know you're on from North Korea. I said, I know this is a real cheek. I said, but you're the last country I need. I said, I'm using fairly modest antennas. I'm no way I'm going to get through a pile-up. I said, would there be any chance of a sked? Email comes back like 2 minutes later. Hi, Laurie. Yeah, pleased to help out. You know, when do you want to meet up? I thought, bloody hell. So I said, well, look, 10 meters is open. I thought, let's get you away from the QRM. Let's go up to 28,750. I will call you on whatever, Sunday morning, 0800. Go on there, listen on 10 meters, sounds fairly quiet. Go up to 28,750, call P5/4L4FN, comes back 5 and 9 plus. Huge signal.
Wow.
But, wow. So we have a contact. We have a chat. You know, how come you're there? And, you know, what are you doing there? And one thing and another. And then I'm thinking here, and I am the only person in Britain to have worked in North Korea. Nobody had done it. Very few in Europe. Very few people had done it. There'd only been in the very low hundreds of QSOs with this guy. And I thought, I don't know, I quite like being the only person in Britain to have worked in North Korea. But then I thought, you know, all my mates here, I thought maybe I'll try and do him a favour. So I email him again. So Eddie, fantastic. Thank you so much. You know, really appreciate it. Said, look, it won't surprise you to hear a lot of my friends here would really love to work you. I said, difficult for us Gs because we're behind the DLs and the Italians and the Russians, and we're kind of at the end of the line, you know, and any chance I could bring a dozen or so stations on frequency. Okay, so yeah, absolutely fine. So I get various of my friends. There was one who refused to do it. One just said, no, I'm not going to work DX that way. And I always respected him for that, but the others were more than happy. And he comes up again the following weekend, same frequency, miles up 10 meters, works about 15 people, mostly Gs, I think it was a PA. And there were already one or two people who had kind of got wind of things. And as we finished, there were people calling, or they'd realised what was going on. Did that, did again the following week, another few people I put through, so maybe about 20 Gs by then had gone through. And then he comes back he says, look, Laurie, he says, I hope you don't mind. I said, I think we won't do any more skeds like this because I'm getting a lot of heat from other countries about why I'm only working Gs. So anyway, that was, you know, again, that was, I don't know if any of you know a Yiddish word, chutzpah. Chutzpah is the thing where an orphan where someone murders his parents, then throws himself on the leniency of the court as an orphan. It's kind of cheek to the ultimate degree, and that's what it was chutzpah. Anyway, as always with these stories, there's a subscript to that story. Sometime later, I was working in Turkey. It was during one of the Iraq wars. I think also whether it was 1999. It wasn't very long after, and he'd eventually, Eddie got a year's operation in Pyongyang. Then eventually they closed him down, and it was accepted for DXCC and all the rest of it. I was in Turkey working down on the Iraqi border in southeastern Turkey, and came across a bunch of people from the World Food Programme. and chatting with him. And I said, I know one person from the World Food Programme. I said, Eddie Georgiadze, he was in Pyongyang. He said, oh, Eddie, we know him well. He's working in Ankara. I said, okay. I said, have you got a phone number for him? He said, sure. Someone had the number. So I ring this number and familiar voice answers. I said, P5/4L4FN, this is G3UML. And he sort of said, what? I said, Eddie, I said, I'm in Turkey. I said, I'm working down here. I said, you're Turkey. So he couldn't believe it. Anyway, I was in Ankara a few days later and we ended up having dinner in Ankara. I love these things where circles sort of come round and connect up again.
Fantastic.
That's the North Korea story.
And again, all from amateur radio, you've been able to meet, people around the world. Just conditions have worked well, and circles have just merged into each other,
it's a great hobby. Yeah. Most days I'm listening, if not actually on the air. Conditions are horrible at the moment. I'm not sure where it's going. I do not speak FT8, and yet probably 60 to 70% of activity now is on FT8. For me, it's as exciting as sending an email or a WhatsApp message. That is making an enormous difference. All sorts of things are making it very hard. Noise, local noise, from a VDSL and this sort of thing. I have a regular S6 to S7 noise level here. This new transceiver has an incredible digital noise blanker, which rescues signals that you think you can't hear, and suddenly they're in there.
Great.
So, I still enjoy it. I still have never got over the novelty of sitting in my front room, not with any, using a completely natural process, i.e. the ionosphere, to talk to somebody on the other side of the world. Yes, I know I can do it on WhatsApp and I can do it on email and all the rest of it. But
it's not the same, is it? And those people outside of amateur radio...
Yeah. For me, it's like climbing Everest by taking a helicopter to the top.
Yes, absolutely. But even the fact of, I would tell my story always in amateur to other friends who aren't amateurs. And, last week I was talking to a guy in Russia and everything. And they sort of look at you and funny and think, well, why didn't you just pick up the phone? But no, but it's not the same. It's not the same, and everything else. Fantastic, Laurie. We have one question who one of the folks watching had asked me. When you were in Northern Ireland, did you come across another journalist called Keith Burnside? He's a fellow amateur who works for he's a local television presenter.
Do you know, I'm not sure I did actually. Working for who? For UTV or for BBC?
I think he would have been UTV, possibly, perhaps, but he's been around for a brave number of years. But he is an amateur guy called Keith Burnside. But
no, I don't think I did actually. I'm not sure. There's through the BBC. There's been a bit of a revival actually, and not the aerial radio group, but that was defunct. But a couple of guys got a new thing going, and there's a lot of us mostly technical people, but there are journalists there as well.
He's actually, someone's just commented there. He's actually a newsreader now for the BBC. Really? He does the local news, So
what's his call sign?
Oh, no. I'll open it up to the floor. He's a GI4 call sign, but there we go.
Davies, Gulf India 4, India Yankee Oscar.
There you go.
Okay, no, I don't know him, and I've not spoken to him, but I might just drop him a note just to say hello.
Indeed. He's still active. But Laurie, are you happy enough to take a few questions if anyone has any burning questions?
No problem. Go ahead.
Folks, if you want to go ahead, just introduce yourselves, your first name obviously and your call sign, and feel free to ask anything at all there.
Hi Laurie, this is MIZHX. I don't know if you can hear me all right.
A little bit echoey, but yeah, I've got you.
Yeah.
Just wave your hand. I've got the gallery. Everybody's so just wave your hand. Who's talking?
Okay.
Yeah, there, bottom there. Yeah, I've got you.
Okay. My deceased uncle GM3ITE's best friend is a chap called Les Hamilton.
Yes.
GM3IN.
Yeah, still around, I believe.
Sorry?
Les was very involved with the Falklands. He was actually more over the piece. He was more involved than I was.
Yes, he was the first contact with Bob McLeod in the first notification. And there was another amateur in the Falklands, Tony Pole Evans,
Yes,
who
VP8.
operated right through the conflict.
Yeah,
VP8,
there was an awful lot of stuff going on there right the way through. Now, I'll be honest, I was kind of out of it after about 3 days because, as I said, I actually got sent away again. But the news story was what Bob was telling us, and once that had got over that, obviously that side of the story went away. But there was all sorts of stuff going on all the way through. Antennas lying on the turf, all kinds of stuff, which I've... there's one friend of mine here, a G3VPW, who was very involved with that as well.
Yeah,
and I know Les was very involved in that. Yeah,
and Tony Evans, he continued to operate throughout the period and sending information through. Which went to the MOD and then back to the task force, all within minutes of his operations there.
It was a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah,
it certainly was, and we were all invited over on the 20th anniversary as VPIs, and they had a march past, and all the amateurs were the celebrities at the march past. It was a great time. If anybody's interested, if you go onto Les's QRZ webpage, there's a link to his own webpage, and further down there's a lot of photographs and information about the Falklands through amateur radio.
Yeah, he's still alive, Les isn't he? He must be of some age now.
Yes, he is. Yeah. Yes, he's still alive. And funny enough, Bob McLeod is on the cluster right at this minute.
Right. Bob is very active, actually. He's on. He's on most days. He's in Port Stanley now. Has a very good signal, and his wife is an amateur as well. His wife Janet, she was working for Vodafone down there. She was something like their South Atlantic representative or something, VP8 AIB, and she's quite active in there as well.
Okay,
Laurie,
well, thanks for that. It was thoroughly enjoyable.
Great. Laurie, you've done amazing things here as an amateur. Is there anything you still feel as if you want to achieve, or you would love to work, or anything like that? Before.
Oh, that's a difficult question. I mean, there's always more DX to work. I mean, I've worked all the countries on various bands, but across the bands, but trying to pick up new ones on various bands. So I worked, as I said, Kosovo for the first time on 10 meters over the weekend. I still get a kick out of working new ones like that. I would ideally like to have bigger antennas, but it's not possible at this location. One looks at remoting. That's quite interesting now that people are doing interesting things with remote stations. My internet skills are limited in the extreme, but as it gets noisier and noisier, the possibility of setting up some sort of remote station in a quieter location is interesting. People have done that very successfully. I wouldn't say there's some sort of towering ambition that, I suppose maybe working every country on every band, I suppose, but that ain't going to happen.
Fantastic. Folks, anyone else have any questions there? And I would just say, if once you've asked your question, if you mute yourself again, it just keeps the video a wee bit more cleaner. So feel free, folks. If
G3VFC.
Yeah, I can see you there. Hello.
Yeah, hello, Laurie. Thanks for doing all of this. You took me right back. I also was at Television Centre in those days. In ICR and International Control Room.
Yeah.
Now you were radio and I was TV. But my goodness me, you've painted a wonderful picture of broadcasting and of amateur radio, and I thank you for it. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, how long were you working for the BBC?
37 years.
Good Lord.
Not as long as you were, and I've been retired.
Great, fantastic. It's actually really revived there now. There is a station on the top of New Broadcasting House, G8 BBC. They've got a fair bit of equipment up there. There's a TS590, there's some VHF equipment, slightly dodgy antennas because obviously they can't put too much up there. But there's quite a few of us there. In fact, there have been times when there've actually been 4 or 5 radio amateurs actually in the newsroom. Jim Lee, G4AEH, is a regular newsreader on Radio 4. Very nice, slightly northeastern accent. You hear him all the time. And his girlfriend is Kathy Cluxton, who is from Northern Ireland, I think. So Jim is very active. Ian Pritchard, G3WVG, is one of the longest established cameramen. He works mostly for Newsnight now. We've known each other for years. He came along on an OB truck during the JY1 thing in 1970 as a 19-year-old engineer, and we've been friends ever since. There is Mark Pivac, G0JML, who is a white stick operator, originally from New Zealand, who is a senior writer on World Service Bulletins, World Service Radio Bulletins. Jonathan Kempster, M5AEO, was one of the technical people. He's left now. But a couple of these guys have got this. They got the space and they got the equipment and got the permission to operate. And there's quite a lively group there now, actually, much better than it was ever in the aerial radio group days, I think.
Indeed. And I was down at Lime Grove at one point, and that was it was there, but I didn't ever become aware that anybody operated from there.
No.
There's one little bit you spoke about JY1 and pointing him off to have a bit more of a chat. I also worked JY1. Call me Hussein, and anytime you're around, drop in for tea. I'm in London quite often. And I was working him from my little orange Mini, crawling up Park Lane. And I hoiked him off of GB3LO, as it was then.
Yeah.
And, we had a nice little simplex QSO. Nice boat, as you say.
Yes, I mean, he used to go to the Radio Society of Harrow because he went to Harrow School, and he was their patron. I think he went there a couple of times. And very, very nice man. Certainly as Middle East potentates go anyway.
I never got the cup of tea, by the way.
Laurie, as Golf India 0 Alpha Zulu Bravo, Ian, we're up on the northwest of the province, very close to Derry, Londonderry, and a wee place called Dungiven. Yep. I could listen to you all night, your stories. Fantastic ambassador for amateur radio.
Yeah.
The one question I was wanting to ask you was, obviously you have a lot of experience of sets and radios. With all your journeys and all your stations that you have worked in various places, is there any radio or set that stands out as being, that's that fantastic bit of a kit that I have used or have had so many contacts on?
Well, yeah, you're right. I've used a lot of gear over the years. I think it's a difficult one. That, I mean, we started off. I mean, when I started the Collins S line, that was the Rolls Royce. Very, very expensive, beautifully made equipment. Then Heathkit came out with their own cheap version of it, the SB line, and we ran that gear fine. We had the transmitter, the receiver, and the amplifier. And actually, I've still got an old Heathkit monitor scope on the shelf just above where I'm talking to. That was the mainstay of what we had for a long time, and it was terrific equipment. I think one of the ones that broke the mold was the original FT101. Now, when the Japanese when I came in, there was no Japanese radios. It was Heathkit, Collins, Johnson, National, KW, of course, the British one, Geloso, the Italian one. And then the Japanese came in, so there was Yaesu stroke Sommerkamp, and there was Trio, which became Kenwood, and there was Inouye, which became ICOM, and these are all famous names now, of course. But I remember the FT101 was special because it was a fully featured transceiver. It wasn't very big. It was a fully featured transceiver. had AC and DC power supplies in the box.
Yeah.
And so you literally needed an antenna and a microphone and a power cable, and you were on the air. And we used this one mobile for a time. Having said that, I mean, for a long time I used a very small one of the early ICOM transceivers, the IC701, and then the 735. The 735 was a wonderful little rig, and to be honest, I sold it, and I don't know why, because it was small, ultra reliable, and good fun to use. Before this Yaesu I've got now, I was using an FT2000, which is again a super transceiver. I traded it in for this one. Again, I thought of keeping it, but what's the point of just leaving it there in the box? So that's probably available from Nevada if you want, for rather more than they gave me for it. But the FT2000 is a super transceiver.
Yeah.
I almost think now, that was interesting. There was a piece in the Chiltern DX Club magazine. I'm a member of the CDXC. And one of the writers there was saying, have we reached peak transceiver? By which he meant that the latest generation, which is like the ICOM IC7610, this one I've got here, the FTDX 101, the new Trio one, the new Kenwood one, the 890 or 880 or whatever it's called, are so fully featured and so technologically advanced that, have we almost squeezed all the juice out of the lemon? Are they going to be able to make receivers which are better, make more features and so on? And that's an interesting point. I'm sure they will. Yeah. And it's interesting, by the way, the industry is thriving at the moment. I got my gear from Nevada, but I talked to, sorry, I was wrong. I got the amplifier from Martin Lynch and the transceiver from Nevada. And these guys have both been saying during lockdown, they have been run off their feet. People are spending big money on amateur radio gear. I think people who've realized it's a great hobby at home, or they've been looking at the same old transceiver for 30 years and fed up with it. And in fact, Nevada, the guy at Nevada said to me, their problem was not selling stuff. They were selling everything they could get hold of. It was physically getting it into the country, because there is a huge shortage of air freight space, because there are not so many planes flying. Because of this, there is excessive pressure on maritime freight, so you can't get stuff onto ships. And they said they could sell far more than they have, but it just simply that it was getting the stuff into the country. And it is amazing, because this gear is not cheap. If you look at the new Elcraft K4, which I think is finally going to appear, so there's been the K3, which has been a very popular rig, and the K4 in the States is $6,000. So by the time it gets here, it's going to be £7,000. And yet there are people out there who are quite happy to go and spend that sort of money on a transceiver.
Absolutely. Well, I keep telling Esther they're a lot cheaper than that. Whenever I get them at bargain prices.
Yes, I know.
Laurie, it's been a pleasure listening to you. You've got a very familiar voice, like Steve, Golf 4 Hotel Papa Echo, who also works in the BBC, and we have great fun with Steve when he does the WAB squares for us around Cambridge. But thank you very much for a really, really interesting night.
No, it's been a pleasure, and hope to get to meet some of you guys. I did a talk to we established it was the Green Island Club a few years ago. I was on the T32 Sea expedition to Christmas Island in the Pacific, came back and got sent to Belfast almost immediately, and they realised this and wrote me in to talk to them. But that was old style, sitting there in a room with them all in front of me. But this is different. But anyway, it's been great fun, and lovely to talk to all of you.
Great indeed. If you're happy enough, Laurie, we'll have two final questions, and then we've had you on for for nearly 2 hours now, and I think if people had their way, we would listen a bit longer. But Tristan, you had your hand up there. Have you a question there for Laurie?
Yes, just like to, it's an observation. I'd just like to thank for you for allowing me to join. Thank you to Laurie for his professional talk, and I've learned a lot, Laurie. Didn't know you were a BBC broadcaster. I've seen the name on the telly as your presenter, but it's good to put a a face, put a name to the face. But I really enjoyed the talk this evening, and I sincerely hope you will continue doing your work for the BBC for years to come when you come to a retiring age. But anyway.
Well, I think they're a bit surprised I'm still there, but anyway, I am.
but I'm sure, anyway, it's been wonderful talking to everybody this evening, and thanks for allowing me to join you, and I hope to work you one of these days, Laurie, if the condition allows. But thank you very much to you all.
Pleasure.
Great. Okay. Anyone else there? Oh, I see G3UML. I've lost your first name. You have your hand up there.
Hi, Danny. Hi, yeah, I'm with the Marts. And Terry's my friend. I want to apologise for being so late. Things got a bit screwed up here. What I have heard is absolutely wonderful, and I know I've missed the best bit. But thank you so much for your time. Laurie, wonderful subject, and if I'm very, very good, maybe Terry will tell me edited highlights sometime later this week. Thank you very much, and Tristan, hope you feel better soon.
Well, just as an opportune moment then, as you mentioned that, give it a few days and you'll find this video clip on our YouTube channel, which will contain the whole thing from the very first minute to now. So
subscribe.
And subscrib, yes.
So I hope it goes viral.
If you go to YouTube and search MUARC, Mid Ulster Amateur Radio Club, MUARC, the video will appear in a couple of days. So please do like it, subscribe to the channel. You'll do us a whole big favor if you do that.
I will do that.
And
thank you very much.
Laurie, can I take this moment to say thank you so much for giving up your time and speaking to us. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I think everyone has been with you and hanging on every word that you've said, and fantastic amateur radio stories. I mean, absolutely brilliant. We only imagine we get contacts with such importance around the world, but you literally were delivering world news and everything else. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure.
Great to talk.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask one question just before you go?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had a pop out there for.
Who's wave your hand? I can't see who's talking to me.
Sorry, Philip.
I've got you. Yeah.
I had the pop out. Well, it should have only been 15 minutes, but it took longer. So here, the majority of the talk about the Falklands and whatnot, and all your others. I'll catch up with the rest on YouTube. But would you say being a radio amateur makes a good journalist, or being a journalist makes a good radio amateur? Because they're both sort of nosy in a sort of way, aren't they? Yeah,
it's an interesting point. I mean, there are not many. Well, that's not true, actually. There are other journalists who are radio amateurs. Certainly in the States, there's some quite well-known ones. But I think what amateur radio gave me, and bear in mind I've been involved since I was 7. I've had my license since I was 15. The world is your oyster. You have this kind of world view of things. We used to have coming through our house a stream of overseas visitors from all over the place. Used to come and stay and have dinner and tea and one thing and another. So I think it does give you this interest in the whole world as a whole. Whether that turns you into, kind of nosy, muckraking journalist, I'm not sure. I mean, I went into journalism because I've always enjoyed finding things out, and then when I found them out, telling someone else about them, which is kind of what journalism. Gossip. Yeah, kind of. Well, if you like.
Yeah.
I'm not sure one could draw a direct parallel there, but it's certainly an interesting thought.
It's just it was the thoughts I was having before I left. Did your interest in amateur radio bring you into journalism? But I think you said your mother had some influence.
Yeah, no, it was what brought me. Well, I used to do quite a lot of writing for radio magazines, so from a very young age, I was writing stuff. So, in a sense, that got me kind of writing. But there were other family dynamics and things that actually dragged me into journalism in the end.
Great.
Good. I'll catch up on the rest of the talk later. But excellent, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, folks, if you're around next week, I know it might be a bit hard to top Laurie, but we have our very own George here who's on the call as well, and he'll be speaking to us on presenting on contesting 101 and setting up the logger N1MM. So folks, you'll be more than welcome. Look out for the link there, and we'll see you next week. And yeah, catch this on the YouTube channel. And for all those who are watching YouTube, thanks very much, and we'll catch you later. Thanks, Laurie.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
Laurie, good night.
Good night, everyone.